Foy, thank you for doing this interview for Attack of the Doc.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
This is great. So my first question is going to be, what is the secret origin? What is your secret origin? How did you come to Attack of the Show? What was your experience before? How did you get that job? Well, I should say specifically Attack of the Show / G4. I think everyone that worked at G4 kind of worked on every show or in many different capacities. And what I've discovered is a lot of people came in and they started with one job and then they moved to different jobs. Tell me, what was your experience before, how you came to G4 and then your evolving position there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was living in New York City, and I worked at the time, very cutting edge company called pseudo.com. That's PSEUDO.com. And they were making live interactive programming that was streamed on the internet. So you could chat with the people. And at the time, like I said, this was like very cutting edge. Back in the day, a lot of tech problems. We used a real media player, things that don't even exist anymore. And within the pseudo network, there were many different channels. There was the rock and roll channel. There was a pop culture channel, and there was a gaming channel. So I originally was a technical director for all of the channels, but the only channel that had any money, the only channel that had a future, besides just a bunch of New York City local rock stars really making darn cool stuff, was All Games, which was the video game channel managed and owned by Scott Rubin. And they were making programming that was gathering the attention of people in the industry and people in the television industry. And it was just a lot of buzz around what we were doing. So I went to work for the All Games channel exclusively. And at the time, that was some very familiar names. People like, again, Scott Rubin, Jim Downs, Derek Snyder. There were a couple other people. Actually, Derek came later. So I think there was a woman named Janine Nask. There were about 4 or 5 of us that got the call that's from Disney, from an executive at Disney that said, hey, we want to move you all to Los Angeles and make a television network based on the programming that you guys are creating already. And while this sounded like a great idea, I was a born and raised New Yorker, true and true. And I was like, no way am I moving to Los Angeles with a bunch of, la surfer people. Like, I'm a New York City gal. As those words were coming out of my mouth, the .coms bombed, the floor fell out, and the network was shutting down. The pseudo.com network was shutting down or changing and closing, and it hit all these financial problems. And so I said, maybe Los Angeles isn't so bad. Maybe we should take this guy up on his offer. So the crew of us, there's about 5 of us, moved to Los Angeles to build what came to be as the G4 network. We didn't have, originally we had offices on the Disney lot, which I thought was very cool, that I got to go to work every day on the Disney lot. And we all sat in a very small office, and they weren't quite ready for us. So they had us doing weird tasks. So at first we were like building websites for Disney movies, or coming up with, guerrilla marketing for Disney movies. It was all really weird. But at the same time, in the back end, we were laying out what would be the future programming of G4. So as the time went on, and I think it took about 1.5 years from when I arrived and set foot in Los Angeles to when G4 was a thing. But they were doing all the back end work. So we were reaching out to advertisers, figuring out what the programming was going to be. What's the name of the network? There was no name originally. What does our branding look like? Who are we going to get to be on the shows? Are we going to license third-party content? Are we going to create all original content? Are we going to be on 24 hours a day? Or what are we going to do? And so there's a lot of, 1.5 years of really figuring out a lot of that stuff. Now, I was never intended to be on camera. I had I had done quite a bit. I don't know, quite a bit. I've been on camera a bunch in back at Pseudo in New York. It's not something I went to school for, and it's definitely wasn't like my lifelong dream. However, shockingly enough, at the time, it was very difficult to cast or to find women who played video games. And since I had been in the industry playing games, I mean, you work in an office with Scott Rubin and Jim Downs for, however many years, you play a lot of games. I ended up co-hosting on and off a girls gaming show back at Pseudo called Lilith and Eve. And we've been going to E3 for years. We've been covering all of that stuff. So I did have some experience. But again, that was never it wasn't why I moved to California. I moved to California to be a producer. And that's how I ended up being double billed as a producer for the G4TV.com show and the host of the show. And really, and I will touch on Attack of the Show in a moment, but really that show was what Scott Rubin had dreamed the whole network would be. Since we were making interactive programming, he was really, really connected with the chatters and with the message boards and just like the real gamers, right? Like that was his passion, and he wanted it all to be interactive, but so they couldn't make the whole network interactive. We made the show as interactive as we could. Now, the funny thing about that is we actually took a step back in what we were capable from a technical perspective. When we were doing this in New York, we had a live chat room and everything was real. Whereas when we did it for television, because we filmed the show, but it doesn't air live, a lot of it had to be not scripted, but a bit produced. So we would schedule the callers. They knew they were going to call in. We had usually pulled the callers from the message boards. But so it wasn't scripted by any means, but it did lose a bit of that, just like real time, what's going to happen, who's going to get called on, a bit of that element. We couldn't do it, which is funny because now we've got, the mega bucks of Comcast and Disney and whoever behind us, rather than this, just a studio down on Broadway in New York City. But we did lose. We went backwards from a technical standpoint. Anyway, so that was how G4 TV came about. Tina Wood was also not cast. She was a writer. I think she was writing. She was brought in from Los Angeles, so she was not in the original crew of us, the people who came from New York, the All Games team. She was a writer, and she was great on camera. I had a great chemistry. We were all really good friends, so she ended up getting the role. But it goes to the point of like we didn't go through casting agents. We found people who were really playing games and could talk about it, in a eloquent way in front of a camera. And then from there, the network grew, and the network went in a million different directions. And that's when I did, cameos and help work just like we had said on so many shows. I was on Screensavers when Attack of the Show was Screensavers, or however that ended up going down, because we were all so close knit and we were all under the same building and everyone worked there for the most part. This is our full-time job. It's not like we hired hosts to come in and just shoot occasionally as we grew, but originally we were all there full-time. So we were all friends, and we all worked on each other's shows, and we all had very limited budgets and did what we had to do to get it done. So might have rambled on for a bit, but that's how I got there.
Well, I love that. And I have to say that G4TV.com show was really innovative for its time, because it was sort of part radio show, but also like in the early days of podcasting, it was like that longer form conversation that, that I think now is so popular. When you look at the way that media has changed, the sort of quick information bites, I don't know that that's as popular as it used to be. I do think that there's a hunger for a longer form conversation, and you were doing that at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we would have preferred to be longer. We pushed for it to be an hour. We pushed for it to be daily instead of weekly. There was a lot of, fitting square pegs into round holes in some sense, because, we knew what we wanted it to be. The network had their visions, and you kind of just, you find a middle ground where you can. But I do agree that it probably would have been better served in a longer format, because I think people wanted to hear more, especially from like some of our, star interviews or whatever. Like where the gamers want the nitty gritty details of a game. Back when G4 started, the big question that everybody was asking all the time was, will people watch people play video games? Will people talk to developers about video games? Do they care that much, or do they just want to play the video game? And the rest of it is, for the 1% niche people who are that invested. And I think it's been pretty well proven, especially nowadays with, Twitch, and, my kid watches people play video games constantly. And part of me is like, what are you doing? Don't you want to play the games? But he'd rather watch people play than play the game. So that question has been asked and answered. Yes, people will watch video game programming.
But not just that. I think you should give yourself a little bit more credit, because the landscape at the time wasn't like that. You know what I mean? There weren't shows that were like that, right? Like it really stood apart. The other thing I should say also is, I think in addition to myself, you probably had the best hair at the network. My memory of you is always like, oh my, like you're easy to spot in a crowd. So
very true. Very true. Funny side note on that. So back in the day, as I mentioned, when we were going to various potential advertisers, excuse me, Charles Hirschhorn, who at the time was, the man in charge, was like, well, we can't send Laura on these meetings, because his vision of what a business professional looked like at the time was, Hillary Clinton in a pantsuit, which I did not fit that bill. And now times have changed. Everyone's got wild hair. Everyone's got tattoos. Like, I don't think it's that rigid, but he was very hesitant to send me on any meetings with advertisers because I didn't look the part. But luckily I looked the part for the gaming audience.
No, it was, yeah, you're right. Like now everyone, like, that's sort of like, that's just how people are. There's just, you have that option to be that way. I'm pretty, with the exception of my hair, pretty normal looking. But what was then like when you got there at the offices? What was the energy and the vibe like with the people coming in? I think it's one of those things where like it's hard to like put yourself in that mindset of like you didn't realize how big things were going to blow up. But can you talk about like maybe some historical anecdotes about like, Kevin Pereira and him coming to the network, or Olivia, or other people that came in that were essential, and kind of walk through like the development of like this tiny thing, which was in a tiny office, just sort of figuring out what it was, to what it grew to, like kind of track that a little bit. And then maybe instances or memories. I'm asking long-winded versions of these questions as a way to jog your memory. But, like what were the things that sort of stick out in your mind about the environment and how it really grew from this small thing to then a bigger thing, maybe taking us up through like up to 2005, when Attack of the Show in March, I believe it was the third week of March, the name was changed from Screensavers to Attack of the Show.
Yeah. Well, first let me say that I think definitely nobody knew that we were doing anything really of importance. We really had this feeling that like our jobs could be gone at any minute. The network could run out of money. Is anyone even airing, or any channels actually airing these shows? Because it wasn't originally, everyone couldn't go and turn it on, right? It was only in certain markets. And so it was just, I think everyone felt very, very lucky that we got to work in the video game industry, because that's a dream for so many. And we got to be super, super creative And because, especially in the early days, because there wasn't much pressures from the network, like we got to do crazy things, right? Like it was a playground. You could try things. You could, go out on a limb, do something wild. And it wasn't like millions of dollars were going to be lost because our ratings dropped a point. Like nobody was watching anyway. So it was just a lot of fun. And so I think we all bonded over our feeling of, gratitude that we got to do this work, and how much fun we got to have and how creative we got to be. When after work, we would all stay after and do Counter-Strike LAN parties in our office. And it was just a lot of camaraderie. People were playing games in every corner, and you could always hop in, and there was an NFL or a Madden tournament going on over there, or somebody would grab somebody and say, "Hey, I need you to be in this skit. Can you wear this crazy costume? I need somebody." Like we were constantly pulling on each other to, pretend to be an audience member, whatever it is, because we were so low budget, it was just like all hands on deck at all times to get the job done and to make the work and to make the creative pieces. Now, Kevin was my assistant. He was my PA that we found. I think Scott had met him in a chat room, and they started talking because, Kevin is obviously super knowledgeable, but he was my production assistant, and we used to, make him get me breakfast and iron clothes and pretty much just beat on him, as our little whipping boy. He took it like a champ, and he was always just an incredible source of, internet trivia, pop culture, weird facts, and just, like he knew his stuff. He was doing a radio show at the time, and gosh, I'm sure somebody else can remember the name of it, but I don't know what it was. It's some internet radio show that had a little bit of a following. That might be how Scott found him. And the funny thing is, and you can edit this out if it's going to hurt anybody's feelings, but he had always wanted to be on camera. And, rightfully so, he's good on camera. And our director at the time, who was a little bit more old school in his thoughts, said, "We can never put that kid on camera. Like, look at him." And I think they meant like he was scrawny, and he hadn't, his jawline wasn't developed. He looked like a little tiny kid, right? And he just wasn't the image of male hunkness that your typical host or television personality would have. So clearly that director has since been proven wrong, since Kevin did get his shot on camera, and he did great at it. But yeah, Kevin came on as my PA.
Wow. Okay. I did not know that fact. Yeah. I'm going to find out the name of that radio show and probably try to get some audio from it. And there's really, the only drama really in this documentary is really going to just be about like the cancellation and kind of what happened executive wise, kind of behind the scenes with the network. There's no, nothing like that. But I think Kevin would think that that's interesting. I never knew that I knew he started as kind of like an intern and an assistant. I didn't know he worked for you. That is great. So when did you see his transition to being then the co-host of Screensavers with Sarah Lane and Kevin Rose?
When did I see it?
Yeah. How did you witness that evolution from him going from there to that? And then how did your role evolve? Because I saw you just in many different capacities at the network. Yeah.
So, Kevin, just as he was a great resource for us when I'm coming up with topics to talk about on the show, or coming up with skits or ideas, I think everybody at the network saw him as that. So he was really well liked, and everybody knew that he was, funny and charming, and he could talk about this stuff off the cuff. As any unscripted host needs the ability to have, but not always a quality that's easy to find. Somebody who comes off as authentic, and likable and knowledgeable. And so, as we found when we were trying to cast Scott Rubin's co-host, it's really hard to find. We actually auditioned, and it was my pick to go with Blair Herter, Blair Herter and I were friends. We had run into each other out on the streets of Los Angeles one night, and I knew him from his days on Road Rules, and he knew me from watching G4. We were just like, oh my God, fangirl! Oh my God, fanboy! And so we kind of developed a friendship. And he had always mentioned to me like, hey, I want to work at G4. And so I got him an audition to fill in or to replace Scott Rubin when Scott Rubin left. And he was my pick, but he didn't get the spot. I think everybody knows now he's like, I don't know, the president or something at G4. He did end up getting a few on-camera spots at X-Play. But anyway, the point of that was that, it's really hard to find that right person. And so I think it was just a natural fit when they were looking for hosts to Kevin to get his shoulder tapped, because he was already he already had that reputation, right? As somebody who can do the job and somebody who knows this stuff. And so, I mean, it was great. It was great. I was very, very happy for him. And at the time, it still wasn't quite as big as it wasn't quite as big as it was going to get. Like, I don't think Olivia Munn had been brought in yet. And sorry if some of my timelines are off, but like we were still not making the headlines yet, or it kind of blew up more like 2006, 2007, I think. And so, I don't know if he even realized what an opportunity he had handed to him, but yeah.
Well, I was a watcher of the show. I mean, I watched the screensavers. I watched Tech TV. I watched X-Play. I just watched it just because it fulfilled my interests. It was the only network that had all the things that I was into, in one place. And so I was just a fan of it. And, I came through it from Gavin Purcell just hired me. He offered me the job to be the movie guy, to do DVD Tuesday every week.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other story. So I was
out for Gavin, huh?
What's that? Oh yeah, Gavin did great. I'm supposed to interviewing him and John Reiber next week, and that kind of wraps up most of my interviews.
Yeah, Gavin, that's a story to tell. So that.
Oh my God, yeah.
To hear from him, because that's amazing. From what I know, or what I believe happened is as legend would tell you, that Jimmy Fallon came out as a guest. Because Jimmy Fallon is all into what Attack of the Show and G4 was doing. And he loved it so much that he asked Gavin to be his producer, just like there and then, or, within this very short amount of time. And so that's like the dream, right?
Yeah, no, I remember that. I remember when Jimmy Fallon was on, because he freaked me out. I was in the, hair and makeup, and he's like, oh, I just saw him and said, oh my gosh, I'm such a fan. And he goes, well, I'm a fan of you. And it was the weirdest conversation. And
yeah.
I think my spirit left my body, but because I watched him for so many years on SNL.
Yeah.
But with regard to those beginning stages, it's weird because you don't know something's going to be a thing. Because I was involved in a lot of TV shows. I had been doing TV since the late 90s, but I never was on a show that lasted more than 2 seasons. Mm-hmm. And my tenure on Attack of the Show lasted almost 8 years. It was about 3 months shy of 8 years. So I was there from screensaver episodes on Attack of the Show and then on every week. But I always felt I was on like thin ice, because I'm like, I think I was the oldest person there at the time. I was going through a divorce. I had like young kids. It was like sort of this thing of like, well, I'll do this little freelance job on the side. And then it just turned into what it was. But what can you tell me about some of those like other things that could be considered historical anecdotes? You just told an amazing story, which I did not know, about Kevin being coming on as your assistant, right? Like, I didn't know that. But are there other sort of like things that maybe don't seem significant to you, but like whether it's something like Olivia's first day or Sarah Lane's last day, or like what kind of the relationships were with the hosts, and what did you observe, or what memories stand out with regard to like what could be considered some historical moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first, though, I want to touch on the fact, like, whether or not we knew we were onto something big. And the answer is definitely no. I mean, I had been doing the show for 5 years, and that was, like, just when the network started to take off. Like, so it wasn't like, oh, G4 launched and all of a sudden it's lightning and it's amazing. I mean, this was a slow build. This was a lot of years of just struggling and, having a great time, but, no one was watching and there was no money. So it felt like that for a long time. So as it started transition to, something that actually was going to be impactful or something that people were going to remember, that was a long time coming. But as for, any anecdotes, when we brought Tech TV down from San Francisco, there was a lot of mixed feelings. The G4 people were like, why are these kids on my playground? And the Tech TV people were like, we hate you. We were doing just fine up in San Francisco. And G4 did a really messed up thing. And, who made these decisions is above my pay grade. Was it Comcast? Was it someone in an executive suite at G4? I don't know. But they had moved down, like literally, had people pick up their lives and relocate to Los Angeles. So people like Kat Schwartz, Martin Sargent, they've now lifted up their husbands and their wives and their pets and their stuff, moved to Los Angeles, and then they all got canned, like, within a few months. So it was really nasty. It was not a nice, friendly merger. There was a lot of aggression. I think eventually, in the end, obviously it all worked out and we merged and people made friends. But the way that it was handled was really ugly. And it was not meant, they didn't do a lot to like merge our cultures. Like X-Play was X-Play. X-Play was the golden child because at that point, Kevin and Adam were a little bit of a celebrities at the time, at least in that world. And there was nothing done to like maybe bring some G4 producers onto the X-Play set or bring some X-Play producers onto G4 shows. It was really kept really separate, and it just led to a lot of tension. And I think that luckily for there's my dog. Luckily for the common thread of the love of games and the love of this techie lifestyle, we all managed to come together and go out for a few beers, and friendships were formed. But the network did not help in that, and I think it was really, really mishandled. Trying to think of any other, missteps. Jeff Keighley, who's now like he does
Jeff does the video game awards show.
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So Jeff Keighley had done some guest appearances on various shows. I know he'd been on my show a few times, and so he was brought on to be the new host, mostly for his connections in the industry. I think I'm assuming he would agree with what I'm saying. He wasn't back then, at least, the most comfortable on camera, and but he had a lot of connections in the industry. So he got us the big name developers that we wanted to interview and whatnot. I'm trying to think of any.
Jeff's family, because I met his father once, famously owns IMAX.
Yeah, they have some money.
Yeah, from IMAX money. So so that's pretty cool. Yeah, I also, what I'm looking for is just, again, to jog your memory, like looking for like sort of behind the scenes host stories, and it could be about anybody, Sarah Lane, Kevin Rose, things like that, things you might have been privy to of like Sarah's departure, or just any sort of, or like Olivia's first day, which my memory of that, and I'll tell my own story in the doc, is kind of weird, but also like what I loved so much about the environment, especially on Attack of the Show, was sort of like, if you think through what the best moments of that show were, or even the worst moments ended up being the best moments. For example, like when Olivia Munn misread the teleprompter and she said McHammer, and that turned into a thing. I don't know if you remember that, but the fact that everything on the network was so loose, and it was like, I feel like most of my TV gigs previous and post, although I don't do TV so much anymore, more producer behind the scenes, but like, I feel it's overproduced. It's it's overly planned out. And the thing that made everything about G4 so special was it didn't have that feeling. It had that feeling of like these people have a TV show. What are they doing? They felt very relatable because they were not so much told what to do. And this was also like, even behind the scenes too, the producers were also young. For many of them, it was their first job in television.
Yeah.
And so can you speak to, and I guess maybe a simpler way of putting this, sort of the best, what would be considered the best moments, either, G4 or Attack of the Show, and sort of like the worst moments, but the worst, I would also argue, are actually end up being the best moments, at least for me. So I hope if you have anything to say on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't really remember Olivia Munn's first day. I'm not even sure what year she started, but there was only a short period of crossover time that she was there and I was there. And I know there was a little bit of people feeling like, well, we're casting people now, because that's what happened there. I think Olivia did great, but I think there was some resentment in the hallways to that. I think but for the most part, the hosts, they all really got along. I mean, everyone played every role. So, like I said earlier, we all joined in each other's skits. We had a producer named Guy Branum, and actually Guy Branum was one of the Tech TV people. So he came on our show, must have been at the very, very end. And Guy Branum actually moved on to be in, he's been on Chelsea Lately. He's been on, he was in that Ashton Kutcher movie, No Strings Attached, or something like that. Anyway, he's gone on to do some really cool stuff. And he used to make these really, really wild ideas that he would pitch for skits on X-Play. And then they would get turned down to be on X-Play. So then we would do them on G4 TV. And some of them were great. Like you said, like some of them were just so outrageous that they were hysterical. And some of them were just like, I don't really understand what we're doing here, but because there was no rules, we tried everything, right? Like there's no reason to not try it and see what sticks. I'm trying to think of any, most of the host stories that I have would be focused on, Kevin Rose left pretty soon after they came down. Maybe he was there for like a year or so, but he wasn't around when, to my memory, he wasn't around when Attack of the Show became a thing. He had, and maybe he left because it turned into Attack of the Show, because I believe Screensavers was his baby. So I'm not sure if he got pushed out or what the politics there were.
Yeah, I was there, and he just didn't like that it was turning into it was dumbed down. It was focused on more comedy. I mean, I do feel like, just having been there through it, like that the show kind of found its legs maybe around 2007, when Olivia was there, and it was just like, okay, now it's starting to become something. But it was messy between 2004 and 2000, until that 2007, it was like finding what it was. And Kevin Rose, I think, just wanted it to be a smarter thing. He just didn't, I don't think he saw himself as doing like bits and comedy bits. And you could see he was uncomfortable with being positioned that way. And that's just is what it is. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that that goes both ways. So like when you don't have an audience and when you are more indie, you can make really niche, nerdy, techie Kevin Rose programming. But the bigger you get and the more chefs in the kitchen, then the more produced you get, the more you fall into that television made for TV pattern, which can be good because sometimes gold comes from that. But at the same time, it does lose a bit of its, grassroots feel for sure.
Yeah, I feel like it sort of found it found itself. The show had to find itself. It was trying to be a lot of different things, and when it finally settled in, it was in the zone. And I'm talking about like writers and producers behind the scenes like Mike Shaw and Casey Schreiner, who really kind of in addition to the on-camera talent, all kind of coalesced. But it took a while. What do you think, like, when I look at, because I will say this, I've collected hundreds of hours of footage, which we've, over the course of the initial lockdown, because we had a very different vision for what this doc was supposed to be before, everything, the world went the way it went. We've cataloged all this video, and I'm looking at it going like, there's almost something that happened every day on the tack of the show that would get someone canceled. Like it, what I'm trying to say is it was a different era. And so my question is, like, things were very loose in terms of a lot of people, I include myself, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just trying to be entertaining and talk about the things we loved, whether it was video games, movies, or comic books, tech, whatever it was. We were trying to express that passion and be entertaining while doing it, so that it would be watchable, because at the end of the day, it is a television show. But like, what do you think? Like, I don't even know when the last time you even looked at some clips from the show, but when you look, or like your memories of it, it's like, because I will say this, I have looked at footage and I'm just cringing at myself going, oh my God, I can't like, I just think there's a certain, like, I don't know if if what the show was can transition to today. Do you have any thoughts on that? On like, that sort of like, I mean, a lot of that came from the freedom, but I think now, people are more conscious that there may be roads we shouldn't go down in terms of, discussion or commentary.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad, right? Like, in my opinion, it's sad that things like that and a lot of the stuff that we were doing back then would never happen now. Because, we have to dilute everything, and there's just such more hypersensitivity and who's going to be offended. And some of that stuff that happened back in the days, I mean, that was just comedy gold. And it's comedy gold because a lot of the times the budget wasn't there. It doesn't look polished. It doesn't look like a multi-million-dollar movie, right? It's just a bunch of kids doing stupid stuff, like the Jackass guys, right? Where it's like, but there's something so innately good about it that you can't deny that you want to watch it. And it's not for any of the normal reasons, like I said, like, well, the production quality is amazing, or the multi-million-dollar writers, or, it was just a bunch of kids finding their talents. And I do think there have been some people that came out of G4 that are incredible talents. And, G4 was lucky to have them, or they were lucky to have G4, or whichever you want to look at it. It was a really great breeding ground for just raw talent. I think of, what is the place where the SNL actors all came from? There's an improv group.
Well, there's the Groundlings.
Groundlings.
And then also Improv Olympics. So IO, I know because I used to perform at IO West, which is now closed. And that's where like Tina Fey, like so many people came from that, right? Like from Improv Olympics. And there's one in Chicago, New York. There was one in LA, which is since shut down.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about G4. Like, so many people that came from there who continued on in the industry. Many of us left the industry, And just, but the people who continued on, so many of them went on to be big names. I mean, even Olivia, look at Olivia. I mean, she's a household name. I don't know if it's because she dated Aaron, Aaron Rodgers, but regardless, she's got some pretty good movies under her belt. And it was just amazing, the amount of unknown talent. And that's on the backside too. The producers, the writers, the people who came up with this stuff, the directors, my director, Ken Seisler, they just a really great group of talented people. They were all willing to work for peanuts originally, right?
Well,
just trying to get their teeth cut in the industry. And I don't know of another network that since then, or even before then, that's had this, right? Like normally it's a bunch of pros and you're signing on, big name, bringing on big name shows, or like where this is really a grassroots bunch of fanboys and girls who put a network of programming together and got to really play with their talents. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was like maybe wasn't noticed at the time, but it was definitely sort of a precursor to, I think YouTube is kind of the legacy of what G4 left, is like, here's all these people that were on camera that were sort of maybe unpolished in terms of professionalism, in terms of being on camera. I certainly never had any training. People just thought that I wrote funny stuff and you should be on camera. And I don't know why someone said that to me, but that's my origin, right?
Yeah.
But like, when I look at what was being done, it was being done like without, like, it just sort of went out in the ether and that was it. But I look and it's like, there's certain segments like MySpace Girl of the Week that probably would not
right
thing. That's not going to be a segment on the new Attack of the Show. I will just can confidently say that. But there was sort of we don't know what the rules are, so we don't even know if we're breaking them or not. And I love that environment about the whole network. The other thing that was really interesting, and I don't know if you have a commentary about this, like when the network kind of merged over into the E-building.
Yep.
There was a weird where you would see it was like very well-dressed people on the one side working for, the E network, and a lot of gay men.
Right.
And then it was the G4, which was Star Wars and comic book t-shirts and video game stuff and schlumpy nerds, myself included. So there was almost like a Revenge of the Nerds sort of vibe to The Office.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that at all?
So I will tell you that when that happened, my director told me, so at the time I was driving a Jeep Wrangler I didn't even have a roof on it. And I didn't even own a roof for it. I mean, that's how infrequently it rained in Los Angeles, that if it rained, there was just a few drops and I got wet, or I'd had a friend pick me up to go to work. So that was what I was driving. It was probably from 1990. I mean, it was old. And my directors told me I couldn't drive that to work anymore because as a television personality, you need to uphold a certain image. But that had never been the way that we did things, right? We didn't have images. We wore, flip-flops and ripped jeans to work, and we talked about video games, and we drove whatever car we had always had for years because we weren't making the big bucks. We didn't have personal stylists and PR firms. And so it was a big shock to all of a sudden be surrounded by, the E-folk and the real celebrities when we clearly were not polished. Like that's not who we were. I remember, we've been going to E3. I've been going to E3 since as long as I can remember. I mean, since the late 90s, but G4 had been going to E3 obviously from the beginning. So from like 2001, we were there. And there was a switch though in like 2004, 2005 maybe, where like all of a sudden we were all getting recognized. All of a sudden people were asking to take for our pictures. All of a sudden we needed a security guard to follow us around because you know how it is when one person asks for your picture, then everyone around thinks it's okay. And next thing you know, you got 50 people asking for your picture. So like, those were some pretty milestone moments in like look at how far we've come, right? And we would go out for drinks with the rest of the hosts and just kind of be like, whoa, like this is crazy. And at the time, we were the only ones who knew what that felt like, right? We were not actors. We didn't audition for this. This wasn't even our dream to be on television, at least. And so here we were in this crazy, weird position where we were being hounded for pictures and autographs. And so I think that bonded us all a lot as well, because it would be hard for anyone not in that position to relate to what that feels like. And it was like it was just a really big, I don't know if I can curse, but it was a mind fuck, right? Like, me? You on my photograph? All right. I mean, last week I was sitting in my cubicle writing articles about video games, and now I am on television and you want my picture. Okay, let's go with this. So that was a pretty big, those two things I think were very defining moments for me.
My gosh, you jumped the gun on a question I was going to ask. Like, when did you start to feel like there was, like, the network was getting noticed? And one thing I remember was very unusual, that building on Olympic, which was weird, was that the hosts were beginning to become so popular that they had to worry, the female hosts at least, had to worry about stalkers, and they had to be escorted by security.
So that was because of me.
Could you tell that story? Okay, because that freaked me out. I remember when I heard that. I mean, no one cared about me. I'm the DVD guy, but tell me the story if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so I had a stalker who was sending me. So let me take this back. My director at the time thought it would be fun to put a webcam on my desk so people could just like watch me work, right? Like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just working. I'm not chatting with them. But anyway, people apparently tuned in. I don't think a lot of people, but some weirdos tuned in. And so I started getting screenshots of myself from the webcam, and they started out friendly, like he would email them, and then he started mailing them in the mail, but they started out friendly with like hearts and kittens and whatnot. And then they started to turn to, my face being bloody and slaughtered and threats and, I know where you live type of thing. And all of a sudden, what felt like just a fun loving group of community gamer nerds got really scary. Because all of a sudden, like, I was, of course you can film me all day long and have access to everything about me. It was like, whoa, does this guy know where I live? Does this guy, he knows where G4 is? Like, it's not hard to find out. Like, all he has to do is follow me home in my topless Jeep one day, and I have no protection. And so, yeah, we brought it to the network. And the good thing about this, though, at that building on Olympic that you mentioned, the staff had to park in a parking garage, which was like, I don't know, a little bit away and down. You had to spiral down. You couldn't park on like the first few floors because those were for like, I don't know, executives at other companies in the building. And we had to go down. I remember spiraling down like for a good 10 minutes every day. But after this thing went down, we got front row spots up right next to the entrance of the door. So I didn't have to go in the parking garage anymore. They gave us our own special part, the girls. They gave us and I don't know if it was all the girls. I know I did. I think Tina did. Got our own front row parking spots right by the door. And then they would still have security guards escort us in and out, because a lot of times you're working late, you're getting off, it's dark and whatnot. So yeah, that was crazy. A lot of crazy things like that have happened over the years. And I'm not kidding. Like, I don't know, 6 months ago? No, maybe a little more than whatever it was recently. I was in Colorado. And I currently own a painting with a twist art studio. Anyway, this old G4 fan found out that I own a painting with a twist art studio and showed up at the studio and walked inside and told me this story about how he'd lived like 3 states away. He doesn't have a car, but he rented a car so that he could drive to Colorado to meet me. And he seemed harmless enough, right? Like for doing a very, very strange act, he seemed harmless enough. But I think it's a testament to the time as well, where it's like, we almost didn't know, because we didn't know what we were doing and we didn't know the threats that could be out there. And we were just being ourselves. We weren't playing characters. So it just felt natural to speak to these people as yourself and make friendships with them, because we all like video games, we all like tech, and we all like movies. But it was a tough lesson to learn that, like, we had to be a little bit more restrictive and a little bit more closed off, because unfortunately, the way the world is, it's just, there's, that one wacko for every 500, genuinely loving fans. It was a crazy thing. But yeah, I was the reason that guy, he started sending, it was like weird animated videos of me like getting dismembered, because obviously I wasn't responding to him, and that angered him. And I wonder if I probably have pull up some old laptop from ages ago and see if I have the images, because I saved them for a while. So at first they were very complimentary. It was like, oh, look, he loves me.
Well, I'll actually follow up, and because what we're doing is post interview, we need to get like whatever photos you're willing to give us to use in the doc of yourself, right? So when we hear your voice, we'll see your photo from back then. So whatever you want to share. I mean, if you want to share that, we'll kind of make it more lighthearted. I don't want to go too dark.
Yeah, totally.
But and also you can swear in the doc. It is going to be. I don't think it's going to be R-rated, but feel free to swear on any of that. Do you have any other memories of what you might consider to be sort of the best or the worst, and also sort of leading to, because I don't think you were there when the network finally ended. I mean, Kevin wasn't even there, and it was a somber last. I remember shooting that last episode, and it was really like it was sad, but
I wasn't there.
Yeah, best and worst moments, and then like maybe like your memory of the network ending and how you may have heard of it, right? Because even people that weren't there and had moved on, like it was like, oh wow, so what your reaction to that was?
Yeah. So I think the best memories for me are those early days where we had a room called, gosh, I think it was called the Game Lab. I'm sure somebody else knows what it was called. I think it was called the Game Lab. It was just a big room filled with every console you could imagine. The game capture room. That's what it was, because we had interns at this point. We were big time. We got some interns. That was new. Anyway, in the game capture lab, the interns would play video games to capture footage that would then later be used on all of the shows. Tough job, right? Like, I need you to play this video game and record it. So that's a gamer's dream come true. But regardless, the game capture lab was always just the central hub of G4. Everybody was in there. Everybody was hanging out. Everybody was playing video games. You could always stop by and find a friend. And it was such a feeling of, it had nothing to do with whether or not this was going to make it big or we were all going to become stars or rich. It was just like, this is so cool. I can't believe we get to do this. I hope this never ends, right? We were all bonding over how much fun we had. And when I still talk to, whether it's cast or crew from back in those days, we all say the same thing. Like, that was the best time. That was such an amazing time where we all just became such good friends, and we all got to have so much fun. We all hung out after work. We all went out for beers. We all went to each other's birthday parties. There was such a feeling of closeness and camaraderie. And I think that also is a breeding ground for creativity, right? Like, so if you're feeling closed off, or you're feeling like, oh, someone's going to, shoot down my idea, if there's not that safe space, then you're not going people are going to be less likely to throw some crazy off the idea off the wall. But because we were all a bunch of just young, naive, crazy, creative friends, it was really safe to try crazy things and dress up in crazy costumes and go on the street dressed up as a turkey or as whatever it is. And it was really fun. And I think I'm lucky in that I left before it changed, because my memories from that are, it was a difficult choice to leave. But I had gotten an opportunity to move to Microsoft, and I didn't feel that I was on steady ground at G4. I didn't feel the network was on steady ground. I didn't feel it like stability. That was not a word that I would use to describe, G4 at that time. And so I left, but I left when it was still kind of grassroots. So I didn't get to see sort of the corporate takeover and some of those feelings that maybe people, when they do have less than wonderful feelings about G4, it's usually in those later days. Like you said, the last day of G4, I'm sure it was really sad. I know the last day of my show was sad, but it was our call, right? Versus, we weren't canceled, we quit. But it's still a very, very sad thing. There was actually Jonathan Mann, who recently he's every now and then you'll hear about Jonathan Mann in the news. Jonathan Mann has committed to writing a song a day. It was supposed to be for like 365 days. I think he's on like day 3,000. And he writes a song every day, and he writes about whatever's going on in pop culture. He writes about whatever. Anyway, Jonathan, he recently wrote, sorry, I'm jumping around, but he recently wrote Florida Man about the guy who caught an alligator in a trash can down in Florida. You'll have to look it up. And he wrote all the G4 jingles. So he wrote Goodbye G4TV.com, which is the farewell song for G4 TV. And he wrote a lot of jingles for a lot of the show, which again just goes back to this belief that such great talent came out of there, right? Like this guy was an intern who's now going on. I mean, he's been on a lot of the late night talk shows because he's writing this song a day, and it's just crazy. It's really a proud moment to be able to say that you were a part of that. And I've got nothing but excitement for all the people who've gone on to fulfill their dreams, or a lot of us left and moved on to other things, but always look back on it as just a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Could you tell me what your thoughts are on the legacy of G4, the network, and Attack of the Show? Like what was the result of it? I think, and I'll share some of my thoughts, so maybe you can come up with your own on this, but I really feel that G4 inspired an entire generation of creators, because what was so incredible was they had that thing they called the viewer army, right? That like would contribute, and they would actually do segments from like conventions, right? Like which I don't know how much that had been done previous to that, right? Like maybe on the David Letterman show as like a joke, but like they would engage the viewers, and there would be things that would be creatively sourced, right? That crowdsourcing of creativity. And I think that spawned you just see this explosion of creators, whether it's on YouTube or other platforms. Mm-hmm. I think G4, at least showed that, hey, you can do this. And because of that symbiotic relationship between the audience and the show, I felt that inspired a lot of people. But it was also a different time, right? Like, I don't think, fandom, or the country for that matter, was so divided. And now I just sense this really, it's really disheartening to see, is like people, upset because you don't like the latest Star Trek or whatever it is. Like, I don't care what you like or dislike. If you're, a passionate fan, whatever, we have our preferences. But this was a different era, and it was one where it wasn't so divided, and we all just celebrated those things,
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts? I am rambling a bit, but what are your thoughts on the legacy of the network, which ended, well, it ended technically in late 2012, but they continued to redo reruns and these best of shows through like almost the middle of 2013. But what are your thoughts on the legacy of G4 and Attack?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely opened up the idea of, well, I can do that. Or, well, I can make these crazy skits. And I think the difference, though, between YouTube creators and what we were doing is we had a community. And I don't necessarily mean the audience, but like we had a whole slew of cast and crew that were all bonding over our love of video games and technology and that internet lifestyle. Whereas a lot of what I see on these YouTube creators, they're really more about promoting themselves. And it's a very isolated, it's the one person has their channel, but there's not that necessary. They're not all bonding over a topic and a shared passion, but rather it's one person voicing his or her passion. And so that's where we really lucked out, is that we got the ability to create essentially our own crazy YouTube videos, but we got to do it together. And we got a little bit of money to help us get going. And I think it led the way for a lot of programming for other networks. I mean, point in case, the fact that Gavin has moved on for quite a while to the Jimmy Fallon show. And a lot of the ideas that I would see watching Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, they came from Gavin, because they were so Attack of the Show, whether, just some of these like super geeky, deep internet cultures type stuff that you're watching it on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, but it very well could have lived on Attack of the Show, right? So there are pieces of all of it that have moved on and been adapted in where we see content today. I think the interactive element is a big thing. Still waiting for it to be done really right. I still think no one's quite hit the nail on the head yet. But there's pieces of it, right? And so I think, the current day creators have a lot to nod their heads to the original G4 people, because we kind of set that stage and open that gateway for, number one, anyone can do this. All you need is a camera and a good idea. And number two, don't be afraid to fly your geek flag and go niche with your interests, because there's other people out there like you. And I think that was a big thing with the G4 community too, is that a lot of these gamers had never seen themselves so accurately represented on the screen like that. And it made it okay to be a gamer. It made it okay to be a nerd. It made it okay to admit that you're into some of this, super weird cyber nerd geek stuff. That maybe before, representation is important. And if you don't see it in the mainstream, you don't see it out there, you think maybe you're the only one, except for being in this chat room and, on this message board. But this was the first time that I think people saw themselves not represented by actors, but on the real screen, on the big screen, the real people just being themselves and talking about this really weird stuff.
I think that Attack of the Show and G4 kind of just prove that, this is what people like. They really love authenticity. And I think you've seen at least media before G4 and just how it's evolved, especially now to like YouTube and podcasting and whatnot. I think there's a thirst for more authentic voices being represented across all spectrums, right? And I think G4 was kind of dipping its toe in that, and then that proved successful. And now like most of media is like that now. And I think there's even a wholesale rejection of the type of old school, what you would call legacy media, because that just doesn't fly anymore. I'm talking about, major news networks or entertainment networks. I was watching what was I watching? I didn't even know the show still existed, which was Entertainment Tonight. And I'm watching it going, this just seems so phony. Like, it just is like, it's just so fake and false. And it just,
Right.
it's like, it was painful to watch, right? Like it's sort of like, I think The Office changed the sitcom, right? Like, you can't to me, I can't watch a traditional sitcom with like, it's shot on a set, there's applause and clapping and laughter, no matter whether it's funny or not. And The Office changed that. And I feel like G4 in a way kind of at least led the way toward maybe there's a better way to more authentically represent gamers and the presentation, at least, of these topics. I don't know how much longer I have you. It's closing in on like almost 2:00. Can we go till 2 or?
Yeah. Can we spend like 5 minutes before? Because I just got to pick up my son at.
Oh, okay. We'll stop in 10 minutes. So
yeah.
This is a real specific question. I have 2 more questions. Real specific one that you may not know the answer to, which is one, and I keep getting really interesting responses to this because what's weird is people know parts of stories, but no one knows the whole story on a lot of different things. One was when Screensavers was being renamed Attack of the Show, there was a naming contest. Name Attack of the Show. And some of the names, first of all, were terrible, like Game Time, and like I have a list. Do you know what some of the names were? And then secondly, Mike Shaw had basically said we should call it Attack of the Show. And for some reason they said, okay, we're going to call it that. And then people were upset. They were like, that's a terrible name for the show, Attack of the Show. And then Mike Shaw wrote this mission, and he read this mission statement like out loud, and he sent it as like an interoffice, email communication. And I mean, one of the producers was telling me the story of hearing that said out loud, and he got choked up and started crying. Like, so one, do you have that email? I'm trying to track it down. And do you remember anything about the renaming of Screensavers to Attack of the Show? Do you have a story to tell, or, did you submit a name?
I do remember the renaming of the Attack of the Show or Screensavers to Attack of the Show. And I remember there was one of the main conference room in the building, and there was a big whiteboard covering the entire wall. And there was just, a slew of names thrown up on there. And these meetings would go on for days, like an hour on this day, an hour on the next day. And I mean, it was going on for probably weeks of just, you would hear just hysterical laughter coming from the room, or, they would take people in bulks. And so it was just like the biggest deal ever. Right. And I know this from trying to rename G4TV.com, because we hated that name because it sounds like a website. That getting any amount of people to agree on the name of a show is just next to impossible. And I do remember when Attack of the Show was pitched, and the general consensus was, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. That is such a dumb name. Unfortunately, I don't think I have that email. I do remember it, and I do remember being 100% convinced after reading it that this was a good idea. I wasn't one of the people who got to vote anyway, so my opinion didn't matter. But I just remember that there was a lot of just different opinions and a lot of crazy ideas. I believe there was something off the wall about meatballs, like the spaghetti and meatball show. I mean, people were just throwing things. Anything was fair game, right? And because the show covered not just video games, so it covered so many different things. It's like, why not call it, the everything show? It was a tough thing. Looking back, do I think Attack of the Show is a great name? I think it works. I think some people get it, some people don't. But it was a hysterical time and I'm sure a very trying time for those having to make the big important decisions, but it was a really hysterical time to work at G4. It's just everybody was talking about it. Everybody was trying to come up with names. And the list of names probably was 500 as possibilities. So it was congrats to Mike Shaw.
Well,
winning ticket.
I need to get that list of what, we have some of what the names
I guarantee there are pictures, and I believe I've seen them over the years, like on Facebook going on. There are pictures of that whiteboard.
That board.
Okay. The whiteboard was up for a very long time. It was up for weeks as these meetings would come in and out, and different groups of people were in and out, and like, well, what does this group think? And what does that group think? And what are your ideas? So I'm sure people have pictures of the whiteboard. I can go back and look.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. It's so funny. I went through a naming exercise several years ago. We did the same thing. We do this award show with Film Threat every year. It's an independent film award show, and we just didn't want a generic sounding name. And I originally just wanted to call it Award This, right? Like sort of funny, like just sort of like Award This with an exclamation point. We went through days of doing names. We had a whiteboard, and we ended up calling it Award This. It was just came back to like the original thing. And I guess my last question is, and if there's anything that like you like after doing this, you're like, oh, I want to add this, we can totally hop on a live stream and I can do some pickups. And I may need to do that after anyways, once we get a cut. And if you're interested and want, I can send you a rough cut of the movie if you want to see it, because one of my concerns is that I really want it to be factually accurate so that it represents everything well. And like, my I's are dotted, T's are crossed. But my final question is there anything I didn't ask you that you feel is important to add? It could be an anecdote. It could be a story about a person. It could be a memory. Anything I didn't ask you that you feel you would love to be able to express to the world about your experience at G4?
Gosh, I don't think so. I mean, I feel like you've covered the bases really well. I think, we did so many things that were terrible, right? Like if you look back at G4ia, like G4ia 1, and I forget what year it was, like some of those things that we did were so bad. And the reason they were so bad was because now we had sponsors, and now we had network involvement, and now we had all these suits giving us these different requirements and things like that. And it just took away from what G4 was supposed to be at its core. So I think, there's an amazing thing that happened with G4, and I don't know if it'll ever be able to happen again, because now there's just so much red tape and so much, executive involvement in that sort of thing. And unless you're building it on your own with somehow the money to support 60 kids, or 60 talent who happen to be kids, I don't know how it would happen again. So we were just very lucky to be a part of it.
I feel the same way. This is great. I know you got to run and get your son. If you can send me, I'll end the recording right now, but I'll
do a dive and see what kind of, I know I've got some behind the scenes pics and stuff. I just got to kind of dig through.
Laura, thank you for doing this. I'm going to end the broadcast.